When most of us think of the tallest standing stone in Britain, our minds immediately go straight to Stonehenge, right? Or maybe Avebury. But they'd be wrong. It doesn't stand in a famous field with a visitor center. It actually stands right in a quiet, unassuming village churchyard in East Yorkshire, pressed so incredibly close to a Norman church that it rises higher than the church roof itself, raised by ancient hands that left absolutely no name, no record, no blueprint. It's just been standing there, refusing to explain itself for over 800 years. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to follow the evidence outward from this one quiet little churchyard right into a valley that is just full of staggering, ancient mysteries.
First, just try to wrap your head around the sheer scale of this single unbroken monument. We are talking about 25 feet of solid gritstone. It weighs somewhere in the ballpark of 40 tons. That's like stacking several school buses. And yet, what we can actually see is only half the story. Literally. Back in the 18th century, a landowner named Sir William Strickland decided to dig down beside the stone, and what he found was even stranger. There is just as much stone hidden below the ground as there is standing above it. To plant a massive anchor like that into solid chalk, that requires a level of prehistoric engineering that is almost unfathomable.
Part 1. The monolith in the shadows.
What makes this specific site so uniquely fascinating is the sheer weight of history that's gathered around it. You see, the church we mentioned, it didn't replace this pagan stone. The builders actually erected the church directly beside it, quite literally in its shadow, because clearly nothing in 13 centuries of Christianity could make this thing budge. Not the Saxons, not the Normans, not the modern age. It's so immovable that organized religion just decided, okay, we'll build around it. But the first real clue to understanding this landscape was actually completely invisible for thousands of years. It wasn't until the dry summers of the 20th century that aerial photography suddenly revealed these massive, pale lines hiding in the crop fields. These are called curses, enormous parallel banked enclosures running for miles. They're actually some of the oldest large monuments in Britain. We're talking way older than the stones at Stonehenge. And get this, they were dug straight through solid chalk by ancient people using nothing but picks made from red deer antlers. Yard after yard, mile after mile. No metal, no machines, just absolute sheer willpower.
To put that staggering effort into perspective for a second, let's look at the world-famous Stonehenge. Stonehenge has just one great cursus on its plain, just one. Meanwhile, the obscure little village of Rudston, it has at least four. Four of these vast enclosures, with the longest one stretching for well over a mile and a half. And the craziest part is that all four of these massive avenues converge on the exact same bend of the exact same small valley stream, the very bend where the Rudston village stands today. There's literally nowhere else in Britain with this kind of concentration.
And mainstream archaeology totally recognizes how monumental this is. A fascinating study in the Oxford Journal of Archaeology used computer modeling to prove that this entire valley was mathematically deliberately designed, like a giant puzzle. They found intentional sightlines arranged so that if you're walking down these cursuses, the burial mounds on the horizon align perfectly. One cursus even makes this highly intentional dogleg turn, clearly steering towards something specific. And yet, mainstream experts still openly talk about the curses problem, because honestly, they don't know what these avenues were actually for. They have no idea why an unimaginable amount of organized human labor was entirely aimed at one seemingly random bend in a stream.
Part 2. The stone with no date.
So, that seemingly random bend in the stream? That is exactly where our tallest monolith stands. The whole landscape essentially leans toward this one specific spot. But here's the catch. We simply do not know how old the stone really is. Because it's bare rock, it can't be radiocarbon dated. So the window of time for when someone might have put it there is incredibly wide. Just 15 miles away from this spot is Star Carr, an 11,000-year-old hunter-gatherer camp that happens to contain the oldest known dwelling in all of Britain. People were out there carrying out rituals in this landscape 6,000 years before the assumed 2500 BC date of our stone. Today, surveyors estimate the stone's top is blunt because it's lost around 3 feet of solid grit just to erosion. And that erosion, well, it's basically a clock with no numbers on its face.
Now we definitely need to address the strongest skeptical argument out there, the glacial theory. The nearest source of this specific type of gritstone is 10 miles away at Caton Bay. Geologists suggest that maybe, just maybe, Ice Age glaciers carried this massive boulder and deposited it naturally in the chalk. Okay, let's play devil's advocate. Suppose that's true. Actually, even if we assume no human being dragged it those 10 miles,
The mystery doesn't shrink, does it? It actually sharpens. Because, let's face it, a glacier doesn't exactly stand a 40-ton stone perfectly on its end. Some unknown ancient humans still had to discover this massive slab, dig a socket deep enough to swallow half of its enormous weight, and perfectly seat it vertically so it wouldn't topple over for thousands of years.
Part 3. Omen Waters and Falling Fire.
To figure out why those ancient builders chose this exact specific spot, we really have to look at the environment surrounding the stone, because the ground and the sky right at the meeting points of these curses have recorded centuries of, well, deeply strange phenomena. Running right past the churchyard is a winter-born stream known as the Gypsy Race. It flows out of hidden springs, suddenly vanishes underground, and then reappears completely according to its own hidden rhythms. Gypsy is actually an ancient word for a sudden spring breaking from dry ground. The locals, though, they have a much darker name for it. They call it the Woe Waters. According to heavily documented centuries-old folklore, whenever the stream runs high, calamity follows. It reportedly flooded right before the 1665 Great Plague, and then again right before both World Wars.
And honestly, the Woe Waters are just the beginning. The valley's historical records are bizarrely stacked with strange events. Right along the stream sits Duggleby Howe, which is this massive prehistoric round barrow. Then nearby, you've got Willie Howe, a chalk mound basically the size of a small hill. Victorian excavators actually tunneled into it, fully expecting to find a chieftain's burial. But you know what they found? A deep, archaeologically empty shaft. Nothing inside. Just an empty void. Interestingly enough, a 12th century chronicler named William of Newburgh recorded accounts of underground beings feasting inside that exact same mound. Fast forward to today, and you have researchers like Paul Sinclair who have spent years gathering incredibly consistent local data on strange atmospheric lights moving low over this very same valley.
But some of the oldest reports weren't just about the ground. On December 13, 1795, the sky decided to literally put its own evidence on the table. A farmhand working in the valley watched the air crack open and the ground erupt. When the dust finally settled, sitting there half buried in a crater was a still warm, black stone. This was the famous Wold-Newton meteorite. It was authenticated by a magistrate named Edward Topham, and it actually became one of the very first meteorites in history to prove to European science that, yes, rocks do indeed fall from the sky. You can actually go see that exact stone today. It's sitting right in the Natural History Museum in London.
Now, keeping things objective, there is one very popular rumor we kind of need to toss out. For decades, local guidebooks claimed that the monolith had fossilized dinosaur footprints right on its face. However, in 2015, English Heritage came in with 3D laser scanners and completely debunked the myth. No dinosaur prints, no secret ancient carvings, just natural weathering and a few ancient quarrying scars. So we can confidently let the dinosaur theory go. Besides, the fully documented, sworn evidence of the cursuses, the empty mounds, and the meteorite strike, that is all already way stranger than a debunked myth anyway.
Part 4. The Cross Stone.
So dealing with a site that has this kind of undeniable, compounding power, it's fascinating to see how the most patient, institutionally conservative organization in European history reacted to it. In 601 AD, Pope Gregory the Great issued what was basically a highly calculated PR and accommodation strategy. His instruction was super explicit. Do not destroy the temples of the old religion. Clean them so that the people will find their sacred ground still sacred, and they'll come to the new faith right on the sites of the old one. The church's presence at Rudston is literally that exact 1,400-year-old policy, standing right in plain sight.
Even the village itself is named after the monolith. Rudston actually derives from the Old English roodstone, which translates to the cross stone. When the Saxons first arrived, the stone already completely dominated the valley, so they just mounted a cross right on top of it. Later on, the Normans built their church directly in its precinct. Modern villagers even went out of their way to put a protective cap on its weathered crown to preserve it. Think about that. For over 1,000 years, generations of people have actively chosen to baptize, marry, and bury their dead in the eternal shadow of a pagan stone, rather than trying to tear it down. 13 centuries of Christianity managed to accommodate this stone, but they never removed it.
Part 5. What stands beneath?
Let's take a step back for a second and really look at the big picture of this quiet little Yorkshire churchyard. Let's count up exactly what the evidence has given us. We have 4 of the oldest, largest monuments in all of Britain built with a staggering amount of human labor all converging on one single bend in a vanishing stream. A 40-ton undated stone seated deeply into the earth, standing taller than any other in the entire country.
an enormous, completely empty mound with a 12th century historical record of underground life. A river that supposedly warns of calamity. A burning rock that fell from the sky, authenticated by modern science. And 13 centuries of a church that deliberately chose to stand beside a monolith because it knew it couldn't stand against it. Now sure, each piece of this puzzle on its own has a polite, rational explanation. But together, all gathered along one tiny stream in one valley, the sheer weight of these localized facts is absolutely impossible to ignore.
The ancient builders poured generations of sweat and labor into telling us that this specific place, this one exact spot, mattered profoundly. We just haven't figured out how to read their language yet. So, we're going to leave you with this final thought. Look at that immense, silent grid stone anchor sitting in that churchyard and ask yourself, was the great stone raised here because of what the ancient people witnessed in this valley, or has the stone, all along, been part of what they witnessed?